Good evening. Welcome, everyone, and Happy New Year to you all. I'm Lynn Towery, a board member of Southwest Jewish Congress. First, I would like to share some dates for you to save on our upcoming programming. You will find more information on our website, www.swjc.org, about these programs. Sunday, February the 19th, an in-person program at Lakewood Country Club. What is the Power of a Book? Featuring author Jim Schutze as he talks about writing and publishing his book, The Accommodation. Tuesday, March 28th, a film screening of Let Us Die about a chance discovery of an antique desk. The screening will be followed by the film's director, WFAA's Jason Whiteley, the owner of the desk, Tim Mallard, and Walter Levy, who translated many of the hidden documents. Now for tonight's program, is water shortage a personal problem? Following our speakers' presentations, there will be time for questions and answers. Please enter your questions in the Q&A section. Also, for your convenience, we will be sharing links in the chat section during the program. Now, to introduce our speakers, I would like to introduce Dr. Barry Lackman. Barry is a commissioner on the City of Dallas Environmental Commission. Dr. Lackman?
Thank you very much. I have the pleasure of introducing our two speakers. Our first speaker, giving us the state perspective, will be Patrick Lopez, who has served as the Chief of Staff for the Texas Water Development Board since May of 2018. Prior to his work at the Texas Water Board, Mr. Lopez served as tax analyst and senior legislative liaison at the Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts. He's also worked as a legislative staffer in the Texas Senate. Educationally, he earned a Bachelor of Arts and Master of Education from the University of Notre Dame, and a Juris Doctor and a Master of Public Affairs from the University of Texas. Our second speaker is the distinguished author, David Marquis. Mr. Marquis' new book, The River Always Wins, is published by Deep Vellum Publishing, and it's about water as a metaphor for hope in our troubled times. Mr. Marquis is an expert on water for the Dallas Environmental Commission. He's consulted to the Texas Conservation Alliance on water issues, written op-eds in both the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and the Dallas Morning News, and worked on a number of other legislative issues. He is the founder of the 118-acre Oak Cliff Nature Preserve. Without any further ado, we will introduce Mr. Lopez to tell us about the state and water conservation.
Good evening. Barry, appreciate the introduction, and no place I'd rather be on a Thursday night than chatting with some folks about water. Very much appreciate y'all inviting me. I've got a few slides that I'm going to run y'all through. These are, there's almost no text. These are going to be just a lot of, kind of impactful, striking images from the State Water Plan, which is a document that my agency publishes every 5 years. So I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully technology behaves and we'll get going here. All right. Okay, so as Barry mentioned, the agency I work for is called the Texas Water Development Board. We are kind of a unique animal. You'll see a lot of other states where these duties, to secure the water future for a given state might be divided up between a number of different agencies. Here we have kind of three functional areas that are centralized together. So we've got water science component, water planning, and then most importantly, water finance. Our agency is an infrastructure bank that finances water infrastructure projects for political subdivisions, public entities across the state. We do that with low interest loans, and we administer grants. We administer money from the federal government, primarily from the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and then also a little bit of money from FEMA as well. And then we also have state programs, state finance programs that we administer. The water science component, we're looking at primarily the quality and the quantity of water. So, how much water do we have here in Texas? Where exactly is that water located? What's the quality of that water? The water planning component, which is primarily what I'm going to focus on today. We have a bottom-up planning process that began in 1997. Used to be more of a top-down, state-led effort, but now we have 16 regional groups that really drive the planning process. We use population projections, right? We want to know which areas can expect the fastest growth, plan accordingly, where we're going to see some potential water shortages. And then we obviously, these infrastructure projects are incredibly expensive, so we need to keep a close eye on what those projects are going to cost. And again, this all leads to financing water infrastructure projects. So we fund a wide variety of those. We do long-term water supply projects. We do drinking water infrastructure, which is, your kind of standard treatment works and distribution pipelines to your home, wastewater projects. And then most recently, we've gotten in the business of financing flood mitigation projects. And we like to brag that we are potentially the only entity in the world that links long-term planning with incentive financing. So why do we plan, right? Why are we here? I think whenever we launch into any endeavor, this is a question that we should ask ourselves. So this document that you see in front of you, this is the cover of our most recent version of the state water plan. We publish this every 5 years. So, planning is necessary to responsibly manage and develop the state's water resources for the benefit of future generations. Reliable water supply is essential to supporting the robust economy that we've got here in Texas, preserving our agricultural and natural resources, and sustaining the fastest growing population in the country. We plan primarily with a target of ensuring that we have enough water in the drought of record, which was established in the 1950s. So we're, this is primarily about resiliency, right? What we want to make sure that worst case scenario is as painless as possible. I mentioned these 16 regions earlier. You can see that, we cover the entire state. Obviously, we play primarily an administrative and financial support role, but these 16 groups operate autonomously. What El Paso needs for its water infrastructure is much different than what is going on in South Texas versus Beaumont versus rural areas versus, high growth metro areas. So we provide these groups with the autonomy that they need to recommend that the projects that are going to best secure that water future for their respective regions. And so not only do we divide these up geographically, but there are, in statute, there are 12 required interest groups that must sit on within each of these 16 planning areas. So you can kind of see here, we've got a wide variety, diverse group of stakeholders that are kind of informing that water planning process within each of the 16 regions. And we are very reliant on our volunteer army of 480, I believe was the last count, regional water planning group members. We simply could not do what we do without those folks taking on that role. So every chance we get, we thank the folks who volunteered their time and their expertise. All right. The purple is where we have been population-wise. This is a great example of exponential growth that you might remember from a stats class back in high school or college. So we're sitting here at 2020. This is on a decade by decade basis, but some of y'all might have seen that the Census Bureau just kind of made it official that Texas has hit the 30 million population mark. That was just a couple weeks ago into December. So that's where we are today, about 30 million people. I mentioned earlier that we plan 50 years into the future. And so we're projecting, borrowing these projections from the state demographer's office that Texas will have about just over 50 million people in 2070. So the water resources of this state are going to be strained as a result. So we need to plan accordingly. Here you see just kind of a heat map of where we've experienced population growth. This will come as no surprise to you, right? We've got our big metro areas, the 35 corridor, starting down in Bexar County, San Antonio, up through the Austin area. You see the Metroplex. Those darker color areas are experiencing the fastest growth. The Houston area is growing fast, right? This will come as no surprise here. So this is what's been happening in about the last decade, from 2010 to 2018. And then this next slide here will show you, over the course of the next 50 or so years, where we expect the high growth areas to be. So I'll slide back, here we are in those kind of core metro areas. And now you'll see kind of those collar counties, those, outer ring suburbs is where we're going to expect to see the fastest growth. We'll still have growth, obviously, in those big metro areas, but, the metropolitan areas are going to just continue sprawling outward. Okay, here we are, right? If you look at this purple line on top, it actually tells a pretty hopeful story. 2020, here we are with a pretty flat demand we're projecting over the course of the next 50 years, despite the rapid population growth. And that's because we are banking upon quite a bit of conservation to keep our water use steady. This dotted line kind of looks ominous, right? We see that this is our existing supply, but I want to point out that this is in a do nothing scenario. So if we do nothing, right, we're in big trouble here. But the reason why the Texas Water Development Board exists is to shrink that area between the two lines as much as possible. So we'll talk a little bit more about how we plan to do that. So here are the annual needs by category. The largest kind of aqua colored bar at the bottom is your agricultural irrigation. You see where we are here in 2020. It'll go up over the course of the next couple decades and then kind of hold steady, decreasing a little bit. Our agricultural producers are actually extremely good stewards of the resource. So we are banking on them to continue innovating with their conservation practices. This red bar you see is municipal use. So that's kind of, your typical, what you would think of as tap water, right? What homes and businesses are using. And you'll notice that grows quite a bit, right? So that's really a function of population growth that I had mentioned earlier. So that is primarily the need that we are trying to meet over the course of the next 50 years. We've got some recommended strategies. Water planning is really an all of the above deal. Texans are going to do their part over the course of the next 50 years, managing demand, which you see in those kind of that light green color there. But we've done a lot actually over the course of the last, 30 to 40 years. So we've picked a lot of that low hanging fruit. So there's only so much more that we can do as far as conservation and managing our demands. So ultimately, it's going to come down to creating new supply, which is what you see represented by those blue bars there. Here's another way of looking at those strategies. Really, this just sort of shows that surface water is going to be the primary way that we bring on more supply. You can see how comparatively how demand management factors in there. Reuse is kind of our growing innovative strategy. You might have heard that referred to as water recycling, and that's kind of taking what is normally a wastewater stream. It's treated, intentionally captured, and then put back into the water supply. So, you know, irrigation has kind of been the most common reuse strategy. A lot of golf courses are irrigated that way. If you've seen purple pipes anywhere, like on a construction project, that's all reuse water. So the idea there is that the water is treated not to drinking water standards. It's treated to, you know, still highly treated, you know, going through the normal process, but it's kind of more quickly recycled back into the water cycle. Groundwater needs to be, it's again, part of that all of the above approach, but it needs to be done responsibly. And then you see kind of our more innovative strategies down there. That's seawater desalination, and then aquifer storage and recovery, which is sort of like a savings account for your water. In times of plenty, water can be injected into an aquifer and then withdrawn later during drier times. Here is demand by category, the same information just kind of presented differently. Here we are, you know, on the left side of the graph in 2020, right? You see that agricultural irrigation is really the biggest driver of water use in the state right now. You see where municipal use is now. It's the second highest, but still considerably behind. But then as population grows, municipal use is going to go up and up and up. And then we see our other four categories remaining fairly constant over the course of the next 50 years. This one looks a little intimidating at first, but this is kind of shows you how we're using water by region of the state. The size of each circular pie represents the total volume of water used. So I'll point you up to region A and region O in the Panhandle. You see very large pie pieces, and you see those pie pieces have, it's almost entirely agricultural irrigation. Then I'll point you over to region C. I think a lot of the folks listening tonight are in the Dallas area. Also a lot of water use, but almost entirely municipal. Region H is the Houston area. Again, a lot of municipal use, but also you'll see that manufacturing industrial is pretty big. That's the yellow pie piece. Region M in the Rio Grande Valley, a lot of irrigation, but still, you know, a fair amount of municipal use as well. And then K is the Austin area down to the Gulf. And then L is the San Antonio area down to the Gulf. So those are kind of the largest users of water by region. Here's the irrigation demand by region. You'll see region A and region O in the Panhandle. The green is where they are in 2020. And then the purple is where we project they'll be in 2070. So again, cannot stress enough the role that agricultural conservation plays in the state's water future. It is the biggest deal, the biggest driver of securing a water future for the state. Here's municipal demand by region. Again, region C is the Dallas area. There we are in 2020. Big growth up into 2070. Region H, the Houston area. And then K, L, and M is Austin, San Antonio, and the Rio Grande Valley. Here is our manufacturing demand by region. Surprisingly, our manufacturing and industrial community does a really good job conserving water, right? The production, the output of this industry is going to grow hugely over the course of the next 50 years, but proportionally, the amount of water that they will consume is pretty low. And a lot of that has to do that, folks are candidly are motivated by the bottom line, right? The more water they save, the more profitable the business is. This is a very simple yet profound concept here. We make a distinction between availability and supply. So if you look at that big blue oval that represents all of the water that is available in Texas, whether it be surface water or groundwater, and then the white just shows that, this is the existing water supply that we have. That's what we are actually connected to and could be delivered now. Surface water, you'll see that both the availability and the supply are projected to remain pretty constant over the course of the next 50 years. But with groundwater, it's a much different story. You'll see that there's a marked decline in both the available amount of groundwater and the existing supply of groundwater. And there's two big drivers there. The Ogallala Aquifer runs from South Dakota all the way into the Panhandle. And unfortunately, that resource is being utilized at a rate faster than it is recharging. So the strategy that's being used there is called managed depletion. So essentially, we're trying to deplete that resource as slowly as possible. So the availability of water in the Panhandle is going down. And then in the Gulf Coast Aquifer, which it runs from the Rio Grande Valley all the way up through the Houston area and into Louisiana, there's a big problem there, subsidence, and that's the ground sinking. So if you can imagine that the volume of water underground there is essentially supporting the surface of the land. And so in that part of the world, a lot of folks there have chosen to leave the groundwater in place. It's available, it's there, they could pump it, but it would come at great consequence. So the water is left there. So those are the two big drivers, both the inability of the Ogallala to recharge at a fast pace in the Panhandle, and the kind of conscious policy choice not to utilize the groundwater in the Gulf Coast Aquifer. Here is, we're showing the new strategies, the new water that'll come online by region and type of water, and I'll kind of explain this to you. You'll see region C here. That's the Dallas area again. Surface water is playing a big role, but you'll see that reuse is going to be a big part of the solution there, that water recycling. Moving down to region H, again, surface water is the big driver for new supplies, and reuse as well plays a big role. And then I want to bring you down to region N, and that is the Corpus Christi area. And you'll see that this is the only spot on the entire chart where you'll see that kind of polka dotted aqua color, and that's seawater. So seawater desalination. So Corpus Christi is really the only place in Texas right now that is in the process of planning, design, and ultimately construction on a large-scale seawater desalination plant. That's going to be primarily, it'll be both to support the municipal use there in the Corpus Christi area, giving them kind of another source of water to make them resilient, but then also to feed a lot of the industry that we see. Liquid natural gas export, a lot of petrochemical facilities there in the Corpus Christi area. So just wanted to point that one out, that that's really the only portion of Texas that's utilizing seawater desalination. And then finally, I'm going to wrap it up here. These are the total capital costs to meet the needs, to build all of the projects that these 16 regions are recommending. So here we are in 2020 with $20 billion of capital costs. But over the course of the next 50 years, we think it's going to cost $80 billion to meet those needs, to build all of the recommended strategies, water infrastructure projects that we have in the state water plan. And this is in 2018 dollars. So obviously with what inflation is going to do over the course of the next 50 years, that number in real dollars will be much higher. So anyhow, that's kind of the state of where we are right now. And I am going to hand it over to David, and he'll kind of give you the local perspective. And I appreciate y'all's time.
Good evening. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here with you tonight. I want to thank Patrick, who's done a wonderful job in presenting us with information that's very useful to us, so we can have some baseline data and information that we can talk about as we go through looking at Dallas, Fort Worth, and the North Texas region and what our water issues are. And before I leap into that, I want to tell you that I'm here tonight for a particular reason, and that is I'm here and I dedicate this next period of time to my grandchildren. I think that when you know why you do what you do it better. So I'm here tonight for them, because each of us needs to be thinking about what kind of water legacy we want to leave to future generations. But that's really what this is about. You see, I grew up in Lubbock during the drought of the 1950s. That drought of record that Patrick mentioned, that was my childhood. And going back further than that, my mother, my father, my grandparents, aunt and uncle, all grew up during the Dust Bowl. They went through that. They remembered Black Sunday when cattle died in the field. There's so much dust in the air. I remember as a child in Lubbock walking home from school bent over backwards to keep the sand out of our eyes when sandstorms would hit us because of the drought in the 50s. So water is a very personal issue for me. So for the next little bit, I'm going to talk to you about those water experiences and the water experiences of our culture, and here in North Texas, and things we need to address as a culture. Now, first, let's remember in the Judeo-Christian tradition that in the second verse of the first chapter of the Old Testament, it talks about water. The Spirit of God was moving across the face of the waters. It's right there in the very beginning of the document of our traditions, the Judeo-Christian traditions. So let's remember that. And if you look at literature, creation stories from around the world, it's always about water. Nature is always prevalent in that. So it's a bedrock of our whole being. In fact, I would remind us all that all of this is tied together. As we talk about water, we talk about land. Talk about land, we talk about water. Talk about people, we're talking about land and water. For example, we talk about ecosystems a lot, and water is the ultimate ecosystem because there is no new water. I want to make that very clear. There is no new water. The water that's here now is the water that's always been here and gets recycled again and again and again by Mother Nature. When people move here from California, that huge population growth that Patrick's talking about, no one is bringing the water with them. They come to Texas and they get their water here. So we need to keep that in mind. There is no new water. That's part of our culture here, is to understand the water we have is the water we have. And that's the way it's going to continue to be. Now, let's talk about some different options of how we go about creating a secure future for us here in North Texas. Let's go back a little bit and look at something that Patrick brought up, which I think is exactly right, which is conservation and reuse are going to be very important in the future. Conservation, we've come to think of as, oh, let's turn the water off while we brush our teeth. And that's important. That's good citizenship. But recycling and conservation are much bigger than that. For example, when Dallas was going through a huge growth spurt from 1950 to 1970, when North Dallas in particular was being built out, well, it built out so quickly that we began to fall back on a particular kind of grass, and that is St. Augustine grass. A lot of us have St. Augustine lawns. Well, that is a grass that takes 70 inches of water a year. And in a regular year, a decent year, a good year, we get 35 inches. So we based our lawns in North Texas upon a type of grass that needs twice as much water as we get from rainfall. Now, when we were a city of 500,000 people and we had good years of rain, we got over the 1950s and built reservoirs. That was a good thing to do then. Well, look at what we did. We set up ourselves to be dependent upon irrigating our lawns with water that we didn't have. And now we're at a point where all of North Texas is growing. Let's remember something. At the moment, we're experiencing explosive growth all the way from here to the Red River. And that impacts our watershed. I want to talk about watersheds for a moment. The Trinity River watershed is the longest in Texas, and half the people in Texas are impacted by the Trinity River watershed. Fort Worth, Dallas, Houston. Half the people in Texas are impacted by the Trinity watershed. And what's happening to our watershed as cities north of us continue to develop, and economic development's a good thing, but north of us, more and more concrete is being poured on a daily basis, to the point now that if you look at the eastern half of Dallas, the White Rock Creek area that flows down into the Trinity watershed, even a moderate rain now will blow out the White Rock Creek because water's coming so fast. The Army Corps of Engineers, in fact, has done some very interesting modeling. They've looked at what happens if you take very heavy storms and move those storms around the watershed. What would happen, for example, if a rain that fell south of here, down near Ennis and Kaufman a few years ago, a rancher there got 19 inches of rain in a day. Let me repeat that. 19 inches of rain in a day. That's more than half of the 35 inches of annual rainfall in one day. Now, luckily, he had a lot of open land. But what happens if you take that rainfall and move it north or northwest of here? That rain is going to hit us hard because it's going to fall on concrete that continues to be poured. Again, economic development is a good thing. I'm not opposed to that. But we need to be wise about how we take care of our watershed, because when those big storms hit and they hit north of us, someday that big rain is going to come at us very hard. And we're going to have to be prepared. We're going to have to be prepared also because severe weather, climate issues affect us in many ways. For example, weather is becoming more and more severe. The Army Corps of Engineers will tell you that on a regular basis, they continue to look at infrastructure and whether or not we're ready for big storms. And they can tell you right now that we do not have the infrastructure in place to handle increasingly severe storms. There also is a dynamic called flash droughts. And that means that the ground has gotten so hard and so dry from being without rain for a while that when a big rain does hit, it all runs off. Studies have been done that show that when a lawn is or ground is saturated, you pour water on it, it runs off. It can't absorb anymore. Also, when you pour that water onto a ground that's extremely dry, it runs off. It can't soak in. And we're coming to the point now where we have so much severe weather, either extreme rain or extreme heat, that we're out of balance. You see, Mother Nature, and this is an interesting thing to think about. Our water cycles for thousands of years have depended upon our natural cycles of Mother Nature, where rain falls. Mother Nature filters that rainfall through grasses, over tree roots, as all this water runs down through the watershed to the river. Well, that's not happening anymore because so much of that water is now falling on concrete. So it heads directly to the watershed and to the river and runs off. In fact, it's interesting to think about from a business point of view. Is there anything Dallas really wants to give to Houston? I mean, isn't free enterprise based on competition? Think of this. The more concrete we pour in North Texas and the more we have this watershed that just absorbs rainwater moving very quickly over concrete, well, in essence, we're giving water from North Texas to Houston. Is that something we really want to do? Because when that water hits, it doesn't soak in here. It hits the concrete, goes to the river, goes to Houston. Is that something we really want to do here? So as a result, we need to be thinking in North Texas about everything we do that is water-based, because Patrick's slides were very clear. We're going to go through an enormous boom of population, 20 million more Texans, 20 million more. And remember, everything west of Fort Worth is water challenged. Now you think about that for a moment and think that means 20 million more Texans are going to come and live basically in our half of the state. Now there is water in West Texas underground. A lot of it's brackish water. It's very salty. It has to be filtered. And El Paso, for example, is a great example of someone that has led the way in water filtration and filtering brackish water. So there is water that can be used, but it's not what we would think of as fresh water because it has so much mineral to it. It has to be filtered. Let me give you an example. It's a little town called Morton, Texas. It's out in West Texas near my home of Lubbock. They bought a filtration device, and the future of water is filtration. They bought a filtration device. They put up a wind turbine to provide energy, built a little steel barn, and they pump the water up out of the ground, the brackish groundwater. They filter it through the filtration device, power it with wind power, and put that water out into the piping for their little town. In other words, we're going to have to be creative, like the people of Morton, Texas, in order for us to go through this process in future years. In fact, in the last 18 months, I've had 3 phone calls from 3 different people around the country. This is very interesting. One from California, one from Detroit, one from DC. Each of them is working on ways to finance water projects in innovative ways. Now, Patrick talked about the fact that they do infrastructure loans and water infrastructure, which is critical. It's a critical piece of their mission. What we have to consider is if people in the private sector are going more and more to public-private partnerships, well, what does that tell us? It tells us that people are understanding that water is going to become more and more valuable over a period of time. And we're going to have to look at new ways to finance water projects. Well, there's small towns, for example, up in Detroit, the guy that called me is using social media to fund water projects in small cities, to find investors through social media. The guy in California is developing a water credits market, just like a carbon credits market. And the guy in DC is putting together public-private partnerships that look for creative financing models to do water projects around the country. So if these people in finance are looking for new ways to finance water projects, that tells us that we need to be aware of how we can deal with water and water issues on an economic basis, but also on a moral basis. Not long ago, there was an offer to buy the Fort Worth water system from a private investor. Well, now that raises questions for us, doesn't it? What if someone buys up those water rights and then decides to jack up everybody's prices? And what about justice issues? Is that just to those who have fewer financial resources to purchase that water? So we cannot forget that water is a very holistic and layered set of issues, and it is all tied together, all interconnected. As everything with the environment is, it especially is all interconnected with water. So these are some of the issues that we're facing in North Texas right now, is how do we deal with issues that deal with more and more concrete being poured, which is not only a matter of water supply, it's a matter of flooding and what happens to us when that water comes toward us hard, when the hard rain falls. These are also issues that we deal with our government. Remember that your city, wherever you live, you have representatives, whether it's a city, county, state, or federal level, who need to hear from you on water issues. I've researched your organization, and I'm very impressed with it. You are concerned, educated, informed citizens who can really make a difference here, because we need you to be involved. We need citizens to be involved in this issue and in these issues over a period of time to make sure that the agency, such as Patrick's, good people there, that they hear from you, that the representatives you vote for hear from you. This is not an issue that we can simply forget about, that we can turn our backs on. Most of us, when we turn on the tap, if clean water comes out, we're done with water. But what about when you turn that tap on and water doesn't come out? Well, what about if you turn on that tap and polluted water comes out? These are real issues that people face around the world. This is why I say again and again, we have to look at conservation on a large scale, not just the scale of let's turn off the water when we brush our teeth. Let's take a moment and think about this. What would be large-scale conservation? For example, a few years ago, during the drought of 2011, a really huge bad drought, a lot of the municipal water districts in this area wanted to begin to talk to cities about having more and more emphasis upon native plants. Did you know that in North Texas, there are, I believe, 17 different kinds of native grass? 17 that don't need 70 inches of rain a year. So what if over a 10-year period, we provide an incentive to people to replace their current lawns, their St. Augustine lawns, with native grasses? I'm not talking about rock lawns with cactus. That's not North Texas. That's El Paso. That's the desert. I'm talking about using more common sense methods to do conservation on a really large level. Well, what about if we look more and more toward filtration? Patrick did a good job of talking about reuse. If you talk about reuse, you're talking about a worldwide movement toward this. In India, in Singapore, in Australia, in San Diego, where they're building a reuse plant that will use wind energy and solar energy to provide its energy sources. All of these places around the world are looking at reuse of water in a variety of ways. That reuse might be direct potable reuse, where you take it all the way up to potable standards, or it might be something as simple as the purple pipes and reusing some of the wastewater to water golf courses or water your lawn. But filtration is going to be that key because we've overwhelmed Mother Nature with our fast population growth. So these are issues that we have to really take into serious consideration here in North Texas. And in North Texas, we have a variety of different water districts that supply water, and they do a good job of providing water to us and clean water. But again, I cannot stress this enough, we are paving over the prairie from here to the Red River. We are paving it over. Right now in McKinney, Texas, God bless McKinney, nice town, they have announced 5,000 new homes for development. 5,000 new homes. A lot of concrete. Fort Worth has just announced 5,000 new acres going to development. 5,000 new acres going to development. All those things are good, but all of it impacts water. And this is one thing I really want to hammer home tonight, is that in North Texas, we have to keep up with these issues on a daily basis because we're growing and changing so fast. In addition to that, we have to look at some of the major issues that we have. For example, the quality of water that we have. When you turn on a tap, good water comes out. But let's remember some basics that are almost beyond our control. For example, when bacteria loads go up in the Trinity River, what's the cause of that? Well, when it rains, it washes a lot of bacteria from bird poop into the Trinity River. How do we control that? We're on the migratory flyway. So a lot of birds come through here, a lot of birds live here, that's a great thing. But when it rains hard, it washes bacteria straight into the Trinity River. Now, if you're in a canoe and fell out of your canoe, you'd be okay. I wouldn't drink it right out of the river, but you'd be okay. It wouldn't kill you. The river, actually, the Trinity is actually cleaner than most people know. So as we look at this broad variety of issues, we can have faith in the fact that we have good people at Dallas Water Utilities and over in Fort Worth, their water department. We've got clean water here, but the water is going to become more expensive. It's going to become more creatively financed. There's going to become something we have to pay attention to on a regular daily basis. We can't take it for granted anymore. Turn on the tap, there it is. Don't think about it again, those days are over. We're going to have to be, as citizens, more involved with water policy on an ongoing daily basis. And it's something we're going to have to focus on in our schools to educate students better about that. And I'm happy to tell you, if there are those of us who are doing something about that, who are working on it on a daily basis, I'm very involved with a project called the Dallas Water Commons, which is going to be an urban wetlands near downtown Dallas that will filter 600 million gallons of storm water a year, that will have an outdoor classroom, a beautiful public space, and provide floodwater mitigation and restore the original bed of the Trinity River. So there are ways to address these issues through public-private partnerships and be creative in the ways we think about water and how we deal with water in the future. But that's the kind of thing it's going to take. We've moved beyond the time where we can simply assume that you turn on the tap and clean water comes out, don't have to worry about it anymore. 20 million more Texans are headed this way, and we have to be ready for them and ready to provide them water and make sure we have water for ourselves, do it in a way that's just and moral, so it's affordable for everyone. Now I look forward to our discussion. Thank you again, Patrick, for providing us so much great data to start with. Well, thank you, Southwest Jewish Congress. And let's take a moment right now to remind people that the state of Israel is a leader internationally in water filtration and seawater filtration and in conservation. So we have some great examples to look at from around the world that we can apply right here in Dallas, Texas. Thank you all for being here tonight, and thanks again to SWJC and to Patrick.
Thank you, David and Patrick. We appreciate the information very much. Okay, I'm going to start off with some questions and answers. Or excuse me, I'll start off with the questions. You guys provide the answers. How's that? All right, our first one is, let me read the correct question. I'm so sorry. My computer did not want to agree. Okay, first one is to Patrick. I recently read that Kaufman County is the fastest growing county in Texas. What does the Water Development Board do to keep up with the water demands of growing Texas counties?
It's an excellent question. I had typed in a response, and I'll just kind of share it with the rest of the group. So, our agency is the Texas Water Development Board is a research and resource agency. So we provide them with data. I had mentioned, regarding water quality, water quantity, population projections, and all that. So we exist to empower communities to take the steps that they need to take themselves, right? We can't build anything for anyone. We have a very limited amount of grant money that we can do. But I also shared, we have an interactive, I showed you the copy of the state water plan. There's also an interactive version of that. So you can drill down by community level. So I shared with the gentleman who asked the question, kind of a link to Kaufman County and kind of the use by category projection over the course of the next 50 years. So that's kind of, I mentioned the science component, the planning component, and then we're there to finance at a very affordable interest rate, whatever water infrastructure project that Kaufman County wants to build. I believe that they are served by the North Texas Municipal Water District there in Kaufman County. And that is the fastest growing area of the state, right? I mean, Dallas is growing fast, but those counties north and east and northeast of Dallas are growing really fast. So the North Texas Municipal Water District just put online the Bodark Reservoir, which is located in Fannin County. And so we financed that. I believe it was a $1.4 billion loan that went to the North Texas Municipal Water District. And the district saved, it's hard to project, but if they would have gone to the open market versus the loan that they got from us, they're going to save probably about $400 million.
Wow.
By coming to us. So that goes directly to the bottom line of the ratepayers, right? Everyone's going to be paying a little. I mean, it's tough because your rate is going up, right, to finance new water infrastructure, but it would have gone up by even more. So that's kind of, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I think the next one might be for David. It could be for both of you. Are we susceptible to terror attacks via cyber attacks and or physical attacks? What are our other vulnerabilities?
That's a great question. And first, water infrastructure is considered critical infrastructure. So it falls under the Division of Homeland Security. Major water districts are required to have strategic master plans regarding security. And they don't like to talk about it much because they don't want to bring attention to the topic. But they do have to have master plans. They have to have firewalls built into their computer systems that move water around and do the engineering and the pumping. So it is an issue. There, of course, is vulnerability. If someone wanted to attack a water system badly enough, they could find somebody to do it. But there's a great deal of structural infrastructure of security on our water projects. And again, it is part of the Homeland Security Department, the water infrastructure is. So wanted to point that out to people, that there is security planning on the water projects.
So that's cyber and physical?
Yes, correct.
All right, our next question is, are corporations mandated by law to take conservation measures?
I'll jump in, and Patrick, love to hear you also, but there's what's called ESG, environmental, social, governance issues for corporations that they do have to fulfill. So within the environmental, within the E part of that, water would certainly fall within that. So yes, and also we need to be aware that more and more of the major investment firms, not just here, but around the world, are insisting that the people they invest in be environmentally responsible. And so those two things, ESG, and then also the fact that a lot of the major investment firms really are really pushing corporations to be very environmentally responsible these days.
Yeah, I think it's more of a carrot than a stick type of deal. And there's also, I think, you hear about the triple bottom line for a lot of companies, right? There's the traditional economic bottom line, the environmental one, and then the social one. And so I think a lot of corporations are coming to realize that conservation is just simply good business, right? So folks are motivated by that.
Well, one other quick note, in 2011, during the drought of 2011, which was the worst single summer on record, the 50s were the worst decade, the 2011 was the worst summer. The North Texas Commission held an event for corporations to come and present their conservation work, what they were doing to conserve water. And corporations lined up around the block to attend and stand up and say, here's what we're doing to conserve water. So it's become much more part of the corporate thought process. And look at TI. TI is a huge water user because of the chips they make, but they have new plants that are very green and very water conservation oriented. So I think we can see the corporate world, in part because of the bottom line issue that Patrick mentioned earlier, and in part because it's great corporate public relations and it's great citizenship also. But they've become much more conservation oriented than previously, I think is a fair way to put it.
Yeah, when businesses are looking to relocate, there's usually 3 big things that they're looking at: educated workforce, tax environment, and water availability is
Right.
oftentimes the big 3.
Thank you. This would be for both of you, I believe. What plans are in place if we have long-term droughts?
Yeah, the state water plan, right? It was my agency came into existence in the 1950s as a direct result of that drought of record that David just mentioned. So the entire purpose of the plan is to mitigate against that scenario. And so not only over the course of decades, it's been kind of just a plan, like a wish list, but now we have the money to back it up, right? The legislature back in 2013 pulled $2 billion out of the rainy day fund. And so that works as kind of like an endowment, if anyone's familiar with kind of how a university endowment structure works, where it's there spinning off interest earnings every year. It's invested, somewhat aggressively. And so we use those interest earnings every year to buy down, we use those investment earnings every year to buy down the interest rates on some of those loans, like the ones I mentioned for the North Texas Municipal Water District.
I would also encourage all the listeners to be in touch with their elected officials, with anyone and everyone in positions of influence, to really people focus on conservation, because as Patrick has pointed out, groundwater is important, surface water is important, all these different things have to come into play. And right now, for example, the North Central Texas Council of Governments is working with the Army Corps on a study about the North Texas watershed, how we can use aquifers more to store water underground. When it rains, how can we hold water in valley storage to have it in place so it doesn't just all run off? A lot of cities that have the staff to be able to do it are getting a hard look at zero runoff. So how do we hold the water in place to make sure we conserve that water so when we need it, it'll be there? But these are issues we have to take very seriously, because if you look at the population of people coming to us, have to provide that much more water, in essence, we're almost creating a drought from the sense that there's going to be so much greater demand on the supplies we have. And this is something that Patrick knows. The great places available to build reservoirs are pretty much gone. You know, the folks at city leaders in Dallas a long time ago, because of the drought of the 50s, you know, Ray Hubbard, Louisville, Cedar Creek, those are gone. You know, Bodart Creek Reservoir, it's very long, but very shallow. First time we have a major drought, that reservoir is going to be in trouble. So as a result, our ability to conserve water now, to filter water now, and get those systems in place is going to be extremely important for our water of the future.
Yeah, great point. It's an all of the above strategy, right? We every tool in the toolbox is going to be necessary. And I'm glad you point out that the best and most economical reservoir sites have been used, right? So we've kind of, the story of Texas water is that we've kind of picked all the low-hanging fruit at this point. You know, on a per capita basis, if you compare water use today versus like in the 1980s, we're down about 40%. So we've come a long way. But the solutions that are left are kind of the medium and high hanging fruit that's going to be a little bit more expensive. And that's just kind of the reality of where we are.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, you know, it's interesting to think that when you build a reservoir, you have water in one place, but on a hot summer day, you lose as much water to evaporation as you do to usage. So considering the fact that we're now dealing with reservoir sites that are a long way away from where they're going to be used, you have to move the water a long way. I would encourage people to look at some alternatives like the John Buckner Sands Wetlands. It's 20 miles southeast of Dallas. It provides enormously filtered water through a constructed wetlands process and shipped back up to Lake Levon, some North Texas Municipal Water District project. But that John Buckner Sands Wetlands is a tremendous example, and any of us here on this call can make an appointment, just go out there and take a look at the wetlands. I've got a beautiful learning center there, and what we're doing with the Dallas Water Commons and creating an urban wetlands just south of downtown. We're getting creative, and we've got to get creative to deal with these issues of the future.
One more, we've got time for one more question. In the Dallas-Fort Worth area, it is popular to remove an old house and replace it with a larger house that covers almost all of the yard. This seems to be creating more runoff than the sewer system was designed to handle. How do we get the city to wake up to what is happening? Could we force some of that storm water into an aquifer to prevent flooding?
Aquifers in North Texas are nearly as plentiful as aquifers in the Hill Country, for example. So we are looking for aquifers here in North Texas to do that with. It is an issue in Dallas that we are creating more and more runoff on a regular basis, allowing alternative dwelling units to be built in the backyard of a casita, a mother-in-law house, for example, a place where an aging relative could stay. So these are real issues to create that are going to create more and more runoff within the city. And yes, we are having water infrastructure issues, and will continue to. And every time we have a bond issue, we have to be more and more conscious of drainage and stormwater issues. We also have to make sure we preserve the Great Trinity Forest, the largest urban hardwood forest in America, which is a great sponge. And Dallas Water Utilities owns most of that land, and they're committed to making sure it remains wild. We need to remember that we're bringing 20 million more people here to Texas, and as we do that, we're displacing wildlife. We're displacing the kinds of trees and grasses and land that we need to absorb this runoff. So these are very real issues. And when you go vote for the bond package in May 2024, for example, in Dallas, Texas, whatever stormwater issues are on there, vote for those stormwater and drainage issues to make sure they get funded, because we're going to need it.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. You know, there were a lot of components in that question, and they're all good, right? So, impervious cover and runoff is primarily about, you know, water quality, right? Because, you know, it's dirty water that's running off, right? It's, you know, if water can just kind of naturally percolate down in the ground, you know, you avoid that water quality issue. There's the urban flooding issue as well, you know, that comes up with a lack of stormwater mitigation. And folks are looking a little bit more carefully at the water quantity issue that was kind of embedded in that question as well. You know, can we capture that water? And so that's kind of like a secondary concern. You know, theoretically, I mean, depending upon where that water falls, it'll kind of make its way into, you know, a tributary and then a creek, and then, you know, whatever the nearby water course is. But yeah, it's really challenging. And I put in the Q&A earlier that one of the things that a lot of cities are doing is utilizing aerial photography. And so they'll have a very good idea of how much impervious cover is on your property, and then your drainage fees are assessed accordingly. So
Right.
More impervious cover on your property, well, that's going to cost you more money, because, you know what I mean, that it wouldn't be fair to kind of socialize that cost out to everyone else. So cities are trying to, and again, this is obviously more in your bigger cities. The smaller cities don't have the manpower, the technology to do that. But that's, you know, kind of the, you know, there's carrots and sticks, and that's a good stick, right? Making folks, instead of externalizing the cost, internalizing it, if they're going to be creating more impervious cover.
Well, I want to thank both of you, David and Patrick, for joining us tonight to talk about this very important issue. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at future SWJC educational events. Good night.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.